So we've already been introduced to the notion that in order to be guilty of an attempt, you have to intend the crime. And the mere similarity in those two words makes that not terribly hard to remember. And we saw this in looking at complicity, where the court in both Roebuck and Knox talked about how that, unlike with conspiracy and attempt, complicity does not require intent, but attempt is one of those that absolutely does require this purposeful intent before you can be guilty of an attempt. So what then else? You have to desire the outcome. You have to want the result. What else is it that you have to be guilty of an attempt? Well, the facts will obviously vary case by case, depending on whether you're trying to commit a burglary or a murder or whatever the crime is. The proof will be different. But the legal standard, there are essentially two legal standards, as we've been talking about throughout the class. One, it comes from the common law, and that is not Pennsylvania's. Pennsylvania's comes from the Model Penal Code. So what's the language in these two descriptions of mens rea? One is the common law. You have to make an overt act in furtherance of the crime. And then the Model Penal Code, you have to make a substantial step. Now, you may be saying, well, we've seen overt act before in conspiracy, and it's not the same at all. It's exactly the same phrase, but overt act in attempt means coming very close to completing the crime. Whereas in conspiracy, it can be any minor thing that corroborates your desire to carry out this crime. The Model Penal Code, however, requires substantial step, and that, whatever that term means, and it's going to obviously be defined in context, but whatever that term means, it requires less proximity to the completion of the crime than does the common law standard of overt act. So if you're in a common law jurisdiction, Oklahoma is one of those. We gave you the, Alabama is one of those. I gave you the Alabama code for the statute. Let me just share my screen real quickly. And there you see the Pennsylvania criminal attempt statute that says a person commits an attempt when, with the intent to commit a specific crime, he does any act which constitutes a substantial step. Now, skip down to Alabama's, which looks incredibly similar. A person is guilty of an attempt to commit a crime if, with the intent to commit a specific offense, he does any overt act toward the commission of such offense. Now, when you look at those two terms, you really wouldn't have any reason to think they were at all different. In fact, you may think substantial step requires greater proximity than overt act. For whatever reason, those terms mean exactly the opposite. And they grow out of the lesser requirement of substantial step comes from the Model Penal Code, the drafters being the American Law Institute. These were folks who were more concerned about criminal activity and criminal minds than they were punishment when they were thinking about, or punishment for harm when they were thinking about how to write this code. So we've talked about earlier that there's something anomalous about punishing someone more because they succeeded in finishing off the murder, in robbing the bank. It seems like that the actor is very similar in each case, and that we ought to punish them the same. Well, the drafters of the Model Penal Code were somewhat in line with this thinking. And so their requirement for an attempt requires less. Neither requires harm, obviously, but the Model Penal Code and its substantial step standard takes the view that if you set out to commit a crime and we can show that you have the mens rea required for it, then that in and of itself is pretty bad stuff. So we don't have to catch you in that last bit, in that little, in that near miss category. If you've done something that is strongly corroborative of your intent to carry through with this crime, we're not going to require the same kind of proximity that has been common in the criminal law. So we'll now start to look at some cases that will flesh out for us what this means.